Hello, it's Mr. Cho, and today we're gonna talk about transport in humans, chapter 6. Alright, so anybody likes to go cycling or any sports, right? We often know that when you go to exercise, your pulse increases. And so what is your pulse? Your pulse is basically your heart rate, right? So this cyclist is training in a high altitude room and is designed to mimic conditions at high altitudes. In this room, the level of oxygen in the air is made lower than that of the sea level. So do you know that Singapore has a high altitude room? Okay, so we know that atmospheric air, right, contains about 21% oxygen, and the higher you go up the mountain, right, the lesser the air that is, or lesser the amount of oxygen that is. Okay, so yeah, why is oxygen and the heart so important for our body, right? Because of this transport in humans. Okay, so we're going to talk about the main component of blood, and the learning outcome is to state the components of blood and their roles in transport and defense. Plasma transports blood cells, ions, soluble food substances, hormones, carbon dioxide, urea, vitamins, plasma proteins. Red blood cells contain hemoglobin for oxygen transport. White blood cells can perform phagocytosis, antibody formation, and tissue rejection. And platelets help to change fibrinogen to fibrin, which causes clotting. Okay, so this is a unicellular organism. Okay, and yeah, let's talk about this first. So man has always considered blood to be a symbol of life. When an injured person has lost a lot of blood, a blood transfusion is necessary. What is in this amazing? What is the significance of this amazing substance, and what is in it? In a simple unicellular organism, no part of the cell is far from the external environment. Oxygen and nutrients can diffuse through the cell membrane and easily reach all parts of the cell. Similarly, waste products can be rapidly removed from the cell by simple diffusion. Okay, so this unicellular, uni means one, so one cell organism, it's very easy for the oxygen to enter, go to different parts of the cell, and the waste products can also move out of the cell easily. So that's quite easy. But in a complex multicellular organism, such as humans and other mammals, numerous cells are found deep in the body, far away from the external environment. Simple diffusion alone cannot bring enough oxygen and food materials to these cells in time. It also cannot remove waste products with sufficient speed. There must be a transport system to carry substances from one part of the body to another. The transport system in humans, also known as the circulatory system, consists of a series of blood vessels that run throughout the entire body. So the blood vessels we know are your artery, your veins, and your capillaries. And we have the blood itself, which flows through the vessels and carry materials around the body. And we learn about the four components of blood. And lastly, the heart, which is a muscular pump which ensures that the fluid keeps flowing throughout the vessels. So, the circulatory system contains blood. Blood transports substances around the human body and defends it against disease. These are the four components of blood: plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So let's talk about the first thing called plasma. Plasma is a yellowish liquid in blood. It contains mainly water and substances such as glucose, salts, proteins, amino acids, fats, vitamins, hormones, and excretory products such as urea. It also contains red and white blood cells. Plasma transports blood cells around the body, nutrients from small intestine to other parts of the body, excretory products from organs where they are produced to excretory organs for removal, and hormones from endocrine glands to target organs. Okay, we'll talk more about this endocrine thing in subsequent chapters. Okay, so you might be wondering, what is this plasma? Okay, let's search for it. Components of blood. So in our blood, there are 4 main components, and these are your plasma, the platelets, white blood cells, and plasma, platelets, white blood cells, and red blood cells. Okay, so about 55% of our blood is actually made from plasma. Okay, so how do they separate it? They actually do this thing called centrifuge. They spin your blood, and because the red blood cells have higher density, they will then go to the bottom, and the plasma, which is a liquid, has a less density, it will float on top. Okay, so this is a picture of the plasma. Right, the plasma is like that. Okay, so plasma is important. One thing to be aware of is this one, right? The urea. Okay, so urea is produced mainly when there is too much eating too much amino acids or eating too much protein. Okay, we will talk about this in the future also. Okay, now we move on and talk about red blood cells. And there's a few things that you have to remember for red blood cells. Okay, firstly, red blood cells are circular and are biconcave in shape. Okay, the reason why they are biconcave in shape is actually to increase their surface area to volume ratio. So as you can see, the meaning of biconcave means that there are two caves. Bi means two, right? So this is a biconcave shape, and below it, underneath it, is also the same biconcave shape. So because of this shape, it allows an increase in the surface area to volume ratio, and that actually increases the rate of diffusion of oxygen into the cell and out of the cell also. The red blood cell has no nucleus. This allows it to carry more hemoglobin to bind to even more oxygen. The red blood cell contains the red pigment called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a molecule that contains a little bit of iron as well as other substances, and this molecule can bind to oxygen. Right, so it's able to bind to oxygen reversibly. So when there's a high amount of oxygen around it, it binds, and there's very little oxygen, it will release the oxygen so that it can move to the cells that need the oxygen. And the red blood cells are also flexible. They are able to squeeze through the capillaries and go into very tiny areas of the body so that all the cells in our body can receive the oxygen. Okay, so kind of repeated myself, but I'll just repeat myself again. Okay, anyway, there's these following adaptations. Okay, obviously we are first talk about red blood cells function. The function of red blood cells is to transport oxygen from the lungs to the other parts of the body. Okay, that's quite obvious. Okay, so like I was saying, hemoglobin can bind reversibly with oxygen, and this is in the lungs. So in the lungs where oxygen concentration is high, hemoglobin will bind to oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. In tissues where oxygen concentration is low, oxyhemoglobin releases its oxygen to tissue cells. Okay, so it's like a back and forth process. They have a biconcave shape to increase surface area to volume ratio. This increases the rate of absorption and release of oxygen. They are flexible and can change into the bell-shaped structures so that they can flow easily through the narrow blood capillaries, like this. Okay, I actually didn't know that the red blood cells can look like bell shape. Okay, but sure. Okay, and lastly, they have no nucleus, which means there is more space for hemoglobin to be stored, where it can bind to even more oxygen molecules. Okay, let's see if I can find a quick video of red blood cell squeezing. Okay. So you can see the red blood cells are moving very quickly. These are your capillaries. And all these white areas will be our body cells, right? Which need to receive oxygen also. Okay, this might be where there's a capillary. You can see the red blood cells moving. I think that is the artery. This must probably be the capillary. Okay. So, okay, so that's the red blood cell. Okay, just to add on about the red blood cell, here is stated that the red blood cells have no nucleus. This doesn't mean that the red blood cells are created without nucleus, or they have a nucleus when they are immature or like really baby red blood cells. But when they become mature red blood cells, they will actually remove their nucleus, and then that gives them more space. Unfortunately, the side effect is that this causes the red blood cells to die pretty fast. Not super duper fast, but like in maybe a month or so. So every day your body is making a lot of red blood cells. Let's see how much red blood cells your body is making. How much red blood cells is created every minute? Alright, so according to this website, it says about in 1 minute you make about 120 million red blood cells. Quite a lot of red blood cells. Okay, and how long do red blood cells live? I think it's about, okay, so not as long as other cells, because they don't have nucleus, so they cannot have the repair, right? There's no nucleus to control the repair for them. Okay, so just now we were talking about this training in high altitudes, right? So there's a low concentration of oxygen in the air at high altitudes as compared to sea level. So like for example, Singapore is a sea level country, right? We are very near to the sea. There's no mountains or any high altitudes in Singapore. So we are very used to like the sea level oxygen. So if one day we go to climb Mount Everest without training, we will find it very difficult to breathe. Because why? The diffusion of oxygen into the lungs is slower. There's less oxygen absorbed into the bloodstream. And so for people who are adapted to living in this mountainous condition, their body actually produces more red blood cells with more hemoglobin. And this will ensure that there's sufficient oxygen to be available for aerobic respiration to provide enough energy to meet the body's daily activities. Okay, so like some examples would be people living mountain. Okay, my English is so bad. Okay, so no, not this one. Okay, I can't exactly remember the name of this group of people, but for people who live in this kind of difficult climate, they tend to have very red cheeks. Like their cheeks are more reddy, right? Because they actually have a higher red blood cell count in their body, and so yeah, okay, yeah. So that's why they have. Anyway, that's one interesting fact. Okay, so for the next thing, okay, we'll talk about white blood cells. White blood cells, there are two types of white blood cells. Okay, the first type is called a phagocyte. And the function of a phagocyte is to perform phagocytosis. Okay, this one you need to remember the definition. The phagocytosis is the process by which a white blood cell engulfs and destroys foreign particles such as bacteria. Okay, so what happens is that, let's say there's some bacteria that enters into your body, maybe you eat it or it enters through a wound in your body. So these phagocytes kind of form like the first line of defense in our body. They will come along and then they will like just basically engulf this bacteria, and then they will take it in, and once it's inside them, they actually have certain enzymes in the white blood cell that will destroy the bacteria. Okay, that's the first type of white blood cell, a phagocyte. let's watch a quick video of that. Let's go to YouTube. Phagocytosis. Okay, so you can see this is a phagocyte, this is a bacteria. Let the chase begin. These are our red blood cells, by the way. And nom nom nom, he got the bacteria. So once it's inside the cell, he'll start to do phagocytosis and destroy the bacteria. Okay, the other type of white blood cell is known as a lymphocyte. So a lymphocyte does not do phagocytosis. Okay, instead, what does it do? It produces antibodies that can recognize foreign particles. Okay, so how does it do that? It actually has, okay, this textbook never give me any pictures, never mind. These antibodies, these antibodies are, you can think of them as a bit like a homing missile, right? So this is an antibody that is produced in response to a foreign substance, right? And we call these foreign things called antigens. So foreign bacteria have antigens, or even foreign viruses, these all have antigens on them. And so our body actually can adapt. And when we face this bacteria, the first line of defense, right? Remember we said is the phagocytosis, right? The phagocytes will eat it up, they will engulf everything. Then those phagocyte cells will have a bit of memory, right? Our body will start to develop an immunity against the same type of virus or the same type of bacteria. And so the next time that this bacteria or virus comes and attack us, the lymphocytes will get involved and they will produce this antibody. This antibody is specifically designed to target a specific antigen. It's a bit like enzyme, lock and key, that kind of hypothesis, but it's not an antibody antigen hypothesis. So you will bind to this antigen, which is what the bacteria has, and you will surround it. Okay, when it's surrounded, this will cause the bacteria to die. Okay, so it also works for viruses, same story, right? The virus also has antigens, and so for example, when we did our COVID-19 vaccine, right? When the COVID-19 vaccine, what did it teach our body to do? Is it taught our body to produce antibodies that can react to the COVID-19 virus. Okay, so if there was the COVID-19 virus enter our body will be able to produce these antibodies from the lymphocytes, right? And this will destroy the COVID-19 virus. Wait a minute, this is wrong.
The immune system attacks germs and helps keep us healthy. Each germ has different markers on it called antigens. To fight a germ, the immune system custom makes an antibody, also called an immunoglobulin, that attaches onto the antigen. The antibody tells other parts of the immune system to destroy the germ. After they are created, antibodies usually stay in our bodies in case we ever have to fight the same germ again. Antibodies are also made when people get vaccines. Building up lots of antibodies keeps the body ready to fight off any germs it meets.
Okay, so the word germs, it refers to any disease-causing thing, right? So for example, bacteria that can cause diseases, viruses can cause diseases, funguses can cause diseases, right? These are the three main groups that can cause disease. Okay, so now let's talk more about the lymphocytes. So yes, as I said, these lymphocytes can recognize foreign particles. They can destroy disease-causing organisms such as bacteria and viruses. How do they do that? They actually cause the bacteria to clump up together because of these lumps of antibodies, and then the phagocytes will come and finish the job. They will do the phagocytosis, ingest the bacteria together. And they also neutralize toxins that can be produced by bacteria. Okay, so bacteria can produce some toxins. The lymphocytes will produce antibodies that target those toxins, and those will neutralize those toxins. Now, white blood cells are irregular in shape. They have a nucleus, unlike the red blood cells. For white blood cells, they have even shorter lifespan as compared to red blood cells because they are fighting all the time. Okay, so because of this high energy demanding job, right, they tend to die pretty quickly, right? Even more quickly than the red blood cell. Okay, so now let's talk about platelets. Platelets are technically not a cell because they don't have that property, but they are actually a fragment.
Something went wrong.
They are actually a fragment of cytoplasm. Okay, so they used to be a cell, and then they fragment into many platelets. Okay, so what do they contain? They have an enzyme that catalyzes the conversion of fibrinogen to fibrin threads. These threads form a network that entangles red blood cells to form a clot, and this prevents excessive blood loss and the entry of harmful organisms into the bloodstream. Okay, so let's say you are riding a bicycle and you fall down, you scrape your elbow, blood starts to flow out, right? Now, if your blood keeps flowing, that will be bad because you're going to lose all your blood and then you will die. Okay, so our body has developed this system of blood clots. And how does it work is basically when there's an injury, right, our body recognizes that there's an injury. So it wants to create this blood clot. Okay, so how does it work? Okay, before I talk about this thing, let's talk about how it works. So firstly, the platelets will come along, and then they would convert this thing called fibrinogen into an insoluble thread of fibrin. So this fibrinogen is soluble. Soluble means that it can be dissolved into the blood. So it's moving around the blood and everything. But once it's converted by the process that the platelets start, then it's gonna convert into this fibrin, which is an insoluble thread. And this also involves enzymes. Okay, you don't have to worry about enzymes. Just need to know that platelets basically start the process where fibrinogen is converted into fibrin. Then the fibrin would entangle your blood cells, and this whole mess would form a blood clot. The blood clot will seal the wound, and it will prevent the entry of microorganisms and excessive loss of blood. Okay, so when there's an injury, it's very important to keep it clean, right? Because you don't want microorganisms to enter your body and cause infection. And also you don't want to lose too much blood. Okay, there is a genetic disease where some people cannot stop bleeding. Okay, so this disease is called hemophilia, where they do not have, their platelets are not working properly. So their blood clotting mechanisms are impaired, and even slight injuries, right, if they do not have medicine to treat it, then it will be it can be serious for them. It might bleed to death, or they can even die of internal bleeding. So yeah, this is quite a serious thing. If someone has hemophilia, he or she has to take extra care of their safety. Okay, so okay, I just want to talk about this picture. Okay, so here we see a blood clot. A blood clot basically contains a few things. Of course, you have the platelet, which started this whole process. Then we have your fibrin, which is an insoluble thread. And lastly, we have our red blood cells, which were captured by the fibrin threads, and they form this blood clot over here. Okay, so let's talk about this, and then we'll pause the video. Okay, now our white blood cells, as useful as they are, right, in destroying foreign objects, they have some negative side to them. So let's say that a person's tissue is damaged or diseased. It can be replaced by a healthy tissue or organ from a donor. and this is known as tissue or organ transplant. Okay, so one example is that if you got a burn, there's a fire, you got a burn, you need to have tissue transplant for your skin, or maybe you have some kind of like lung failure or heart failure, need a heart transplant or liver transplant. That's called organ transplant. Okay, so this transplantation have saved many lives, and we must be careful. The doctor must be careful that the organ that is transplanted into the recipient must not be rejected. Okay, why? Because any organ from another person may be treated as a foreign body by the recipient's immune system. So the recipient's white blood cells may respond by producing antibodies that will destroy the transplanted organ. And okay, this is the same for tissue also. Tissue the example is burn from skin, blah blah blah. So how do we reduce the risk of this? Firstly, they do what is called as a tissue match. So that means that the the tissue for the recipient and the donor must be as similar as possible. Okay, so perhaps a sibling, parent, a child, those, because they share more genes together, so it might be more genetically similar. If failing which, they have to do like a search across, they just search at the population and see if they're lucky, they might find somebody who's somehow genetically similar. Okay, another way of preventing this is, of course, using medicine. Alright, when I say drugs, I don't mean bad drugs. Okay, drugs is just a term to use for medicine in general. Okay, so these drugs, they inhibit the responses of the recipient's immune system. So they try to lower and make the white blood cells not so active. Okay, but of course that comes with some other negative consequence lah. That means that person tend to fall sick easily, don't have good immunity, etc. Okay, you can try this yourself, practice the questions over here, and then you can start on your workbook 6A also. Okay, and let's pause the video here. It's really quite long already. Okay, see you. Good night.